Welcome to episode 83 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today we have a very special return guest on to talk with us about everything going on in the world, whether it's markets, current events, geopolitics, what's going on with young men, and maybe we'll get into some health topics at the end if we have some time. But EM, thanks for coming back on.
It's good to see you again, Ben.
Yeah, so we've had some conversations off recording, and some of those have to be filtered a little bit for a wider audience, but I'm sure we'll have more conversations like that in the future. But as far as our kind of conversation today, I wanted to get into some of your thoughts on current events and geopolitics, because I'm sure that's what people are interested to hear your thoughts on, as far as Venezuela, Iran, Israel, what we're going to do as far as Cuba or Greenland or some of these other topics that are seemingly floating around here, as we're really only 2 weeks into the year and it's off to a fast start. So maybe we could start with Venezuela and go from there.
Yeah, Venezuela. Venezuela was the cutter of the Western Hemisphere. So, city of London outpost. It was, still is, it's getting cleaned up now, but, every intelligence agency of the Five Eyes and both licit and illicit operations for the Western Hemisphere will all run out of Venezuela for the last 30 years, 40 years. So you don't want to necessarily go for a regime change, because that creates instability and you don't know what's going to come out of it. And there's too many bad actors there, very capable bad actors. So you take out, you help the current regime remove their leader and use their constitutional system to replace with another leader. Now that leader owes you a favor, right? And as long as they don't turn on their people and they don't do things that are, un-American, shall we say, but, as native, more natural to Venezuela, but, things that would truly offend American sensibilities, we support the current regime to clean house. Now, for that, they're going to provide certain kinds of information on people and accounts and activities and those types of things. But that's most likely what Maduro's doing right now for his life, right? It's not many dictators get to live.
Yeah, it is interesting. I can't remember who was talking about this, but the military structure of Venezuela apparently has so many generals where you can't have any one figure really gain too much influence and power over whatever political system comes next. So is that kind of part of the restructuring you're thinking is coming?
Yeah. So give me 1 second. Great question. That was created that way on purpose by the foreign intelligence agencies that never wanted to have to deal with a strong, unified Venezuelan military or intelligence capability. So how do you do that? Well, you have 500 generals in a country that size, and you make them all wealthy and they're all in different ways tied to other things than just the country. So yeah. One of the interesting, it's a great question, by the way. One of the interesting tells, one of the first political prisoners released was a very capable general. I can't remember his name. I'm horrible with names. People can look it up. But one of the very first, political prisoners released was a very popular and very capable general.
Interesting. Well, I remember this post was talking about there'd be one general who's in charge of a certain sector, and they could skim off a certain amount of money, and then they would basically have blackmail on that person, where it's like, hey, if you ever try and get too uppity, then we have you by the balls, basically.
Yeah, well, it's not blackmail. They would just kill them, or they'd kill their family members. What people really need to understand, blackmail only works for a small subset of the population. Most of it's mortal threat to self or family. And every once in a while, they'll kill somebody's family member just to show that they're serious.
Yeah, I guess coercion then is a better word than blackmail.
Correct.
So, yeah, I think it will be interesting to see, because this is where I look at some of the stuff, like some of the reaction from markets and some of the talk about, we're going to get all the oil. Like, I understand most people listening to this will comprehend that it's a 6 to 12 month to 3-year process to even get started on some of this stuff. And you see some of the oil companies starting to basically say, hey, we're not interested unless there's some stability, and we're not going to get our assets basically expropriated again. What's your view on if they can build stability? Are you going to see American companies start to get involved as far as natural resources and with some of the other areas in Venezuela? Because it is a very resource-rich country, whether it's oil, gold, anything like that.
Yeah, so give me a second. Resources, a people's natural resources are worth far more when they're still in the ground than when they're taken out and processed. So right now, what Venezuela needs is a little bit of improvement in production to sale of natural resources, oil only being one. But they don't need a demonstrative improvement in that, because what they need is the graft and the fraud and the corruption that you're talking about. They need that to go away. Venezuela is also, as it rejoins the world stage, is going to have to redo loans and financing, and some of these are going to be 20, 30 year stuff. And looking ahead, there's a lot of infrastructure redevelopment work that needs to happen in Venezuela across all virtually every one of their sectors, and modest improvements in sales, substantive improvements in counter fraud and graft will do the country substantially, as well as they work through probably, people like Jeffrey Sachs and others. This is, what they do 3 to 5 years as they work through refinancing everything from the private sector to the public sector, utilizing the natural resources and the future, productivity of those natural resources. So, again, the greatest value of natural resources is actually when they be used as collateral by still being in the ground. So there's not really an incentive to dramatically improve and increase. The other piece is that, yes, while Venezuela has the world's largest known oil reserves, it's dirty oil, it's sludgy oil, and it's sandy oil. It's not easy to get to. It's not easy to process, and it takes, the sludgy oil really isn't good for anything other than diesel fuel for heavy diesel engines. Yeah. And the sandy oil is very expensive because you have to remove all the water and sand and organic material out of it, et cetera. So, while it has these large oil reserves, they're really of more value staying in the ground and then having a steady known revenue growth that's going to come off of it so that they can borrow against that.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that's interesting too is it's going to take tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure spend for that to get up and running. And we'll see what happens as far as like the refining capacity to handle it. But like you said, it's not the same oil quality as some other parts of the world.
No.
And it'll take some time, basically, is a short version. So
it will take some time, but again, they do have production. They do have production facilities that they just haven't been reinvested in forever. And so it won't take quite as long to improve their productivity. But again, really, you have to think that maybe 80%, as much as 80% of the proceeds from the sale of what they have been doing has just been stolen off the top.
Yeah.
Right. And then with respect to American companies getting in there, absolutely. We are very much going back to the Monroe Doctrine. As well, the original contracts were with American companies.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll see if some of these companies can recover any of that money, or if it's just kind of you have to take another shot. And
they've already written it. Yeah. So they've already written that off. So it's not a recovery at this point, but it's, will they benefit? Do they take the risk in moving forward to now reinvest? But the write-offs have already happened. People got to realize this all happened like 30 years ago.
Yeah. I think Conoco was 12, 13 billion. Exxon took a big hit too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll kind of see where that goes. Definitely interesting. As far as where that kind of leads for other kind of areas around the world, would you rather get into Greenland and Cuba first, or do you want to talk about Iran and Israel? Because I know that's kind of been a focus of yours as of late.
Yeah. So, Cuba, I'm not so, give me 1 second. It is my suspicion that Cuba is going to change on its own. It's already on that pathway and trajectory. Once we remove this undue city of London, Brussels, Rome influence in Cuba, meaning it's no longer able to be used as a base for laundering money or developing devil's legions, terrorist and insurgent forces around the world. And there's no reason for the continued suppression of Cuba. I suspect that relieving the suppression off of Venezuela, we still got to work on Ecuador, Colombia, and some other, Mexico, of course. As we go after the illicit funding networks in the Caribbean, I suspect that Cuba will start making the transition to some form of a, Western Hemisphere style liberal democracy, just by nature alone, right? As its ability to be this Devil's Legion's headquarters is just removed. So I'm not so.
I was going to say, if we could dig into that a little bit, like what's the background there as far as Cuba being a hotspot or a headquarters, kind of an outpost for some of these different agendas and different groups that people might not be as familiar with?
Yeah. So what does the city of London, Amsterdam, Venice, Rome do? It creates these quote unquote failed states. It it's communist state or whatever, but for all intents and purposes, in the modern sense, a failed state. And then they use that failed state nature to perpetually, foster. Say hi to Ben. To perpetually foster insurgent behavior, right? You have this. Devil's Legions assets that you can send out around the world as insurgents. And in this case, they were also sent out as the head of security for the Venezuelan, presidency. Well, that wasn't his security. That was his captors. That's why they're all dead. So, this concept and idea that communism just somehow naturally occurs on its own in places and somehow succeeds is ludicrous. It didn't succeed. It was sent into Russia by the British and and Brussels, et cetera, in the early 1900s. And then it was supported financially for 40 years. Same with China. It's these things are done as a way to be a destabilizing force and to prevent a people from actually really ever developing themselves.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting history with communism in the last 100, 200 years. And I think it'll be one of those things where what we're kind of living through a little bit too is as you see the generational turnover, as you see some of these different, founding myths is what I call them, as far as World War II, what happened in the 1940s, all those different events that people look at as, hey, this is how the kind of current era started, right? I think those are starting to become less relevant as younger generations look at it and say, hey, like this is not right. This is all ancient history, and we don't really give a shit about what happened 100 years ago if like we're living in societies that can't get their act together.
Well, and you couple that at the same time with the people who are keeping the lies are passing away and the lies are going away, and we're finding out a lot of that history wasn't true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot of things are going to be coming out on certain events and certain different versions of history that are not what they seem to be and not what we were taught in history class. So
correct.
As far as how this kind of extends to Greenland, because I think that's like the next topic for staying focused on the Monroe Doctrine, North and South America. How does that factor into the different, geopolitical kind of topics? Because there's talk of, we're going to pay every Greenland citizen $100,000 or whatever the number is. And obviously you're not going to have much European involvement, or if it comes down to it. So what's your view on Greenland and how that plays out?
Well, first piece, we need to remember that 4/5 of the United States we purchased. Right, we purchased the Louisiana territory, gives about half the country, and then we didn't. Yes, we beat the Mexicans in the Mexican-American War, but we didn't just steal the land; we actually bought it from them after the war. at a fair market price. And then we held it, which they couldn't hold it at the time. And not just against us, they couldn't hold it against Comanche, etc. Right?
Yep.
Comanche.
Alaska too.
So we bought Alaska from Russia, right? And that was out of gratitude for what the Russians had done in the Revolution, War of 1812. And then I don't remember when we purchased Alaska. When did we purchase Alaska? 1848? 14?
Mid to late 1800s. I have to go back and
so
look. My head wants to say like 1860 something, but I could be
somewhere
totally
in
off
there.
on that.
Yeah. So, but Russia, there wouldn't be an America if it wasn't for Russia, who helped us both in the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812, and actually again in the Civil War. So that's the first part. Is the United States is this giant country because we bought 4/5 of it.
Yeah, that was pretty close, by the way. 1867 for Alaska.
1867. So same thing. So the reason we bought Alaska from the crown, the Russian crown, is because the Russian crown had been fighting the British and they needed the money, and they had helped us 3 times. Right. Yeah. Well, we weren't just fighting the British; they were fighting everybody, and needed to recover from the cost of the Napoleonic Wars, etc. Give me a second. So that's one thing. So we're not going to conquer Greenland. We don't need to. That's not how America does it, right? We just buy it. We've done that before. We bought the Marianas. We buy, I don't know if we bought the Philippines. I think we just took the Philippines, but Spanish-American War is a little bit different. Give me one second. With respect to why Greenland, well, there is little doubt now amongst certain circles that Europe is preparing for war against the United States through Canada. It will, and what does that form? Are they going to invade and all? No, first it's civil wars to, launch civil war here in the United States, and then to materially support that, to replenish Europe's financial system and the UK's financial system by backing and supporting an insurgent become actual hot civil war here in the United States. In order to do that logistically, they'd have to stage in and, going west through Greenland and going east through, going back east through Greenland. So they would take natural resources out of Canada, ship them to Europe, turn them into munitions and equipment, and then ship that back through Greenland into Canada, down here, down through the northern border. They were going to try and use the Gulf of America, the seaport the sea for the eastern infiltration in Mexico, on the land infiltration in the west of the United States. I think next we're going to move against Mexico. Some things may already be happening there. Let's just say that. This is the conversations that are being had at very high levels about what's really going on. And so you have to take Greenland from them.
I guess the logical follow-up question is, what's going on with Alberta then? Because I've been seeing some talk about what they want to do as far as effectively seceding from Canada. How does that play a role in potentially those plans? Because if you effectively lose the tax cow that they've been milking for the last 20, 30 years, right? Canada is in a much different position if you take Alberta and potentially Saskatchewan from it.
Yeah, so it would be Alberta, Saskatchewan, maybe parts of British Columbia, maybe Yukon, and maybe the Northwest Territory. All part of the world. Well, you come from Pacific Northwest. All part of the world I know fairly well, having spent a good number of my youth there, good number of the years of my youth, and in Alaska. It's not so much the tax, it's that's where the natural resources are that are necessary for the armaments that Europe's talking about rearming themselves. They're not going to be able to get the natural resources from pretty much anywhere else in the world, right? Africa's being denied to them by Russia and China and us a little bit. The natural resources of Central Asia and Russia are now off the table. So where else are the natural resources necessary for a major peer-on-peer kind of war? Canada, well, and the United States, but the United States is the target. So Canada, if you take Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territory, the Yukon and parts of British Columbia away from them, they don't have the natural resources either.
Yeah, I think there's, if you look at where they have production of certain commodities, right, it's obviously a lot of the agricultural is Saskatchewan. Obviously, the energy side of things is Alberta, but there's a lot of other minerals, whether it's gold, silver, copper, nickel,
Tungsten,
like,
cobalt,
yep.
iron, diamonds. Yeah.
I mean, go down the list. They've got some very rich resources, and if you start to basically peel that off, then they're going to be in a very different spot. But my view is that on a long enough time frame that Alberta and Saskatchewan will eventually become a part of the U.S., and that kind of pushes British Columbia basically by way of isolation that way as well. What's your kind of view on on a very long time frame? Is like, do they eventually become states? Do they become U.S. territories? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and a great question. One of the things that we have, one of the things that we have to be very careful of, like somebody did this the other day, they did it very well, but were Greenland to become a state, it would provide a Democrat representation into Congress because it's heavily left leaning.
Mm-hmm.
Same with British Columbia. So there is no real incentive for the United States to bring them in and give them statehood because it would disrupt the balance that we're already barely hanging on to keep America American. So the best thing is to support them as independent territories, protectorates or in territories.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, maybe over time, depending on what happens, the honest truth is, to be quite honest, Ben, I don't know what happens beyond the mid part of the next decade. I don't even really know what happens till the end of this one because we are in that kind of a time frame. But, to answer your question, I could give you a better answer sometime in the mid 2030s because most of this will have shaped up, the difficult bit, shall we say, should have occurred by then.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of this going to become more clear over the next 5 years, especially. But I guess the difficult bits are ahead of us in other parts of the world too, and that kind of is a good way to transition to the Middle East and what you're seeing with Iran and Israel, because that's been something that we were talking about a little bit, and it sounds like one of your primary focuses as of late after the events in Venezuela. So what's your kind of thoughts on the Middle East situation?
Yeah, my only concern right now remaining for a World War III vector is Iran and Israel. And my suspicion is that they're trying to replace the regime in Iran with another British-French regime, because that's what the Ayatollahs and the Shah before were, to then use the strikes against, the ongoing war against Gaza, or the pulverization. It's not a war really, but pulverization of Gaza and the Palestinians as a justification for Iran to strike Israel, and then use that as kind of the Archduke Ferdinand event to drive us all into World War III. So, there's only so much we can do. The same in Venezuela, right? They're going to have to stand on their own. We'll do some supports and intel sharing and other things to help them out. Financial things as well, etc. We're doing the same in Iran. We're not a friend of the regime, but we're not the regime's enemy. So ideally right now, because of the danger we as America are facing, the least amount of regime changes in the world that are possible is what we're going for. Now, if they can get the regime change there is none of the factions, and there's 3, 4, 5 factions pulling and pushing, but the only real factions that matter right now are the two British vectors, the Shah Pahlavi and I can't remember the other one, and then the current regime. Those are the only 3 that we really need to pay attention to. They're all in on Pahlavi and acting like they're friends to Israel. That's all a fake front. So, if I was Europeans and Brits and I absolutely had to have World War III, because I really don't want to take on I really don't want to do the thing in America, because boy, that can go bad. If the Americans rally and they can, then they're going to come for us, and you don't want the Americans coming for you. I would try to get World War III. I would go all in on trying to get World War III. So there is unbelievable amount of effort and influence to try and get a regime change and get their puppet people into power in Iran. And that is very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean the thing you see on social media, and this is where it's hard to kind of separate what is an agenda being pushed and what's real. Like I'm sure there are some protests. I'm sure some of them might not be all that organic, but what's kind of the state of play right now? What do you think that the rest of this year looks like for that area of the world?
I don't, at this moment, being quite honest, I don't exactly know how that's going to go. I have a suspicion. That the regime is going to sustain. There'll be some concessions on the other side. They were already making concessions. The regime was already changing. I suspect, barring some some just black swan stuff. I suspect the regime's going to hold. There'll be some stabilization there. The next question then becomes what's going on in Syria with Turkey and that. But I don't believe, I believe personally that we're pouring all the jihadis into Syria to burn them up, while also tying down Turkey's military in Syria, because that's a massive NATO force. And if it wasn't all tied up trying to deal with the jihadis, both internally and then they're in Syria, then that could possibly, and intelligence-wise and counterintelligence and all that stuff, then that could be quite possibly used against Iran as well. And then we've got the same problem. So we have to watch the region. We have to watch the area very closely over the next several months. But if this regime change effort, this all in, all the cards, all the chips have been shoved in, right? If it fails, then I suspect we'll start to see a realignment. We're already seeing Saudi Arabia hitting, supposed British or supposed Iranian, but really British assets in Yemen and elsewhere. So I suspect while the regime change effort's going on, Qatar is helping us identify, British and French assets, insurgent and, disruption assets in the region, and they're getting taken out by Saudi Arabia and others. Right.
Yeah. No, it's hard to keep up with all this stuff because you see different headlines, even just in the last couple of weeks, where like the Russians used another Russian missile on natural gas storage facilities in Ukraine. And then you see there's power outages in that area of the world. And you have what you're kind of talking about with the focus on the Middle East. Like it seems like everything everywhere all at once. So
well, that's how you bring about a war, right? Is you bring about war through the fog of war, right? You get somebody to make a mistake. And so to do that, you got to be hitting on all kinds of fronts in all kinds of ways. With respect to the Oreshnik strike, I haven't confirmed this, but I heard yesterday that it wasn't actually on the gas infrastructure. It was on aircraft and drone repair facilities. The very same facilities from which those drones that were launched against Novgorod passed through. That it was a direct strike on the air facilities of Ukraine in direct response to the attempt to strike Putin in Novgorod.
Interesting. Yeah, I saw like some of those headlines about like their attempts as far as like trying to get Putin, and it seems like if this is kind of what's happened the first 2 weeks of the year, I don't know what the rest of the year holds, but it'll be certainly interesting to watch.
Well, they're exhausting themselves right now, right? So what happens is you don't want to move first. You want to let your enemy move first. But then once your enemy moves, you want to press them and accelerate them more than they're prepared for.
Yeah.
Because then they'll show themselves, they'll identify themselves, and they'll burn themselves out. And hopefully they'll make mistakes that you can capitalize on off the battlefield, right? Even the covert battlefield.
Yeah. So happens at bursts, I guess.
Yeah.
At this rate, we'd be, I would assume, kind of getting near the end of one of those bursts where everyone kind of takes a pause, reassesses where things are, looks at the geopolitical chessboard, so to speak. And so we might not have as hectic as as hectic of a kind of January, February, March as the first couple of weeks of January has been?
Well, I think we wait till the Davos conversation where Trump's going to be the lead speaker, the Davosians. And I think we wait and see not so much what's said there, because what's said in private will be nothing like what's said in public won't be anything like what's said in private.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's going to be said in private is going to be, for all intents and purposes, terms of surrender. And then we have to wait and see. It'll take them a couple of weeks to figure out what their reaction is to the terms of surrender, after their Coke and hooker fueled 3-day rage. And then, then they'll sit to and try and figure out, okay, some new complex, fuckery kind of strategy. And then we'll see. But I wouldn't expect we'd see the first, real investments in whatever their response is until March or April. That's if they don't, which I don't think they will. I don't think they're going to surrender. These are estrogenics. They're incapable. It's like telling a woman to calm down in an argument. I mean, it's quite literally exactly what it is, right? It's like,
yeah.
That
calm down and ask what I want to eat. And those are the big two.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to go in there and tell you need to calm down. You're acting like my mother. And that's just, that always goes so well. Woman immediately backs down. She totally understands.
Yeah. As far as anything that we didn't really hit on, like what else is on your radar for this year or the next 5-10 years as far as the kind of geopolitical side of things? I know we kind of hit on most of the kind of pieces, maybe except for China, but what else is kind of at top of mind as you kind of look ahead?
There is an all-out coup attempt in China right now against Xi. It's an internal coup. I also think it's going to fail. And it'll further highlight foreign assets in China and abroad. And so I believe that's going to fail. Within the next 5 years, Taiwan will most likely naturally vote to go back to China. So, that was always coming anyways. This coup attempt against Xi with some of the generals and some of the others in China is also highlighting the lingering British, City of London assets in Hong Kong and Singapore and elsewhere. And so if Xi survives this, physically survives and survives the coup attempt, and it's not just Xi, he's one man, but, his factional alliances, then I suspect we'll see Asia stabilize over the next 5 years or so. And we'll see a return as China as the great power in Asia, as the center of the sphere of influence. And things will calm down quite considerably there. But he and his faction and factional alliance has got to survive this all out, and Americans are involved in it. And I know some of them heavily involved in, trying to coup Xi.
Interesting. I guess the follow-up question to that is like, what is right? I don't know if they have a succession plan for Xi, but what is the kind of right? People talk about, it's a Chinese Communist Party, and it's really
not been communist in 30 years.
Yeah, it's not. It has nothing to do with communism. Like if you look at the way they run their economy, and it's like fascism is a dirty word, but it really is government and the state cooperating with business on like the highest level.
Yeah, the way China works is political capitalism, which is what the American system and model is based off of until really Franklin Delano Roosevelt really didn't come undone until we went onto the fiat currency system. But what built America out was political capital, political capitalism or political economy. That's what China has. They don't have a fascist system. Europe has a fascist system. We have a fascist system now. But China has a political economy system, and it works very well. And it was quite literally patterned after the American system with the direct assistance of Nixon and his team.
Yeah, we've gone off the rails maybe in the last 10 or 20 years, and you start to see some of the impacts of that here in the U.S. That's
going back to the 80s and the leverage buyout days, and when we allowed private equity to take over here, we ended our fundamental economy.
Yeah. Well, when you have financialization and like certain things that can be shut down or leveraged or sold off, outsourced,
stolen,
then you see all the stuff we have today where it's like, okay, big business is all for immigration, all for some of these different things. And I think they're politically going to have to deal with what comes as more people wake up and realize, hey, like these people are basically at the head of like the parasite economy here in the US, right? Whether it's, okay, we're going to fire 10,000 Americans and hire 20,000 H-1Bs or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, like the FedEx CEO, the Indian fellow, as soon as he got in there, then he fired, I don't remember how it was, a lot of, Americans. He had them train their replacements, then he hired Indians.
Yeah.
Not in India, here.
Yeah. Well, that's I think the thing that a lot of people are not ready for is people are getting to the point where they want a solution more than they want to be done through the proper channels. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I think we're headed for a stage of politics where people are going to demand solutions, right? Whether it's fix it or if it gets bad enough, then it's going to be fuck it. Then we're going to burn things down. But what's your kind of view on where that leads? I know it kind of ties in with your points on young men a little bit, but what's your kind of view on where the U.S. is headed and maybe in the next year, but also the next 3 to 5 years?
I think in the next year we head closer to hot civil war as things that need to be done and which are done quite legally. But as they're done, the other side hasn't seen us. There's no real sides, right? But the anti-Americans versus the Americans maybe is the better way of saying it. But the Americans haven't reacted in 40 years, so the anti-Americans didn't believe we ever would. But now we are, and now we're getting to the point where their name calling doesn't mean a damn thing as long as we're in adherence with the law, right? Actual law, and not some bullshit interpretation from a fatwa from the bench by some assholes probably wasn't even born in America and shouldn't be on American bench. So two great conflicts going on. One is the final decoupling from the Eurodollar system and the final decoupling from the metals, European and UK metals industries, metal markets, freeing up America back to the control of its own exchequer, its own treasury, its own monetary policy, all of that, and economic policies. That's one front in the war. And then the other front in the war is, removing people who don't need to be here or shouldn't be here or legally here. That unfortunately, I think we're not going anywhere near as hard as we need to. Not even remotely. It took 40 years to get 100 million people here. We're going to get rid of them in 3. If we had every aircraft running around the clock, dropping people off, and it was as easy as just picking them up and dropping them off, we still wouldn't get it done in 3 years. So,
well, unless here's where I'll jump in and say, if they really wanted to do it here, like they would pull out some of the playbook that has been used against people that have been on the conservative, I guess, right wing side of things, where it's like, oh, if you have certain views or certain political friends, it's like, oh, debanked, or you won't be able to get a job, or you won't be able to find a place to live, right? If we really wanted them to be gone and our politicians, the people in power, really wanted them out of here, it's like, okay, then we're going to do checks on like employment, checks on housing, checks on banking, and basically go down the list and say, yeah, we're not going to be doing like subsidized loans so the Patel cartel can like buy up hotels and motels, right? And stuff like that. So what are your kind of thoughts on like basically using more pressure to have some of them self-deport effectively?
Self-deportation is important, but it's not going to be enough either. This is a 30-year this is going to be at least 20 years to get this righted. 20 years, and we got to sustain political will for 20 years. This does get back to the young men and what young men really need to be oriented and preparing themselves for and making themselves subject matter experts on. But this is at least 20-year process, probably closer to 30. Even were we to go draconian, it's still 25 to 30 years. People have no idea logistically what it takes to move 100 million people, even if we're going to move 60 or 70 million and do some kind of amnesty for the others. Right? But people don't have any comprehension of the complexity of that and the logistical requirements and just time requirements. So yes, it would get easier if we change the rules and laws or exercise the rules and laws, that if you were whereas we're going after the really criminal ones, which is mostly who they're going after now, if we also jailed and heavily fined employers who employed illegals, if we heavily fined property owners who housed illegals, that would help a lot. But even then, you still got to get rid of these people. Otherwise, you wind up with 10 times the homeless population and you wind up with vagrant violence everywhere. So it's not as easy, and you've got sanctuary cities that are going to take them in and act against the law. They're openly saying it right now. So none of this is as easy as it seems. Our enemy who did this to us, the anti-Americans, know exactly what they're doing. They know how complex a problem this is for us to work out. And they don't believe we'll have the political will and the intelligence and the wherewithal to do this across what's intent for all intents and purposes is going to take an entire generation. Right?
Yeah, I think if we started with a couple groups, all this would get a lot easier. But then again, that's pretty tough considering our state of politics right now. But as far as the kind of immigration side of things goes, right, if you don't see, this is where we can kind of circle back to the midterms a little bit. I think if you don't see some like significant moves made here in the next 6 to 12 months, I think you're going to have basically a Republican wipeout in the midterms, which, I mean, we'll see what happens. But
then what happens is you've just completely invalidated. So if you're upset about removing these people because it's not happening fast enough for you, and then you have a hissy fit and you vote Republicans out, everything's done. It's done. It will stop right there with whatever's been accomplished, and we'll never get back to it. People need to understand, people really need to understand how unique a situation we are in right now where we can do this at all. That's a tenuous, fragile thing. This is a native country, population of about 320 million people. There's another 100 million people here. The complexity of 400 million people, factions upon factions, vast resources from the outside, pulling all kinds of bullshit, assholes in our own system pulling all kinds of bullshit. The complexity is off the scale. The fact that we were able, that elites, and with some help of the people, but really it was the elites who did this, who got into this condition where we can even be doing what we're doing right now, is a miracle. And we can't expect that miracle to ever fucking happen again. And if we get impatient now and have a hissy fit or bitch out, and we're going to show them, we may never, ever get back to this situation where we can do this, because it's taken 60 years to get into the position where we're pulling all the strings and moving all the things and getting all the people in the right places and all the intelligence work and research work and all the legal work and all this other stuff that had financial work, financial intelligence work, resource allocation, all of these things, and then personnel placement, through elections and other things. It's taken 60 years to get to where we can respond at all.
Yeah, I guess the pushback I have, and this kind of goes into the young men topic as well, is like, if you're not going to show some signs of progress and you're like peace offering as far as like the affordability issues and some of these different problems, is like talking about 50-year mortgages and subsidizing demand and all this other stuff that I think is going to end poorly. Like there comes a point where you get, like, you're just not going to have buy-in, right? You need to see people want, I think, progress towards like the solution that you're talking about. But if there's no progress, then the buy-in, I'm not sure it's going to be there.
Stop you right there, Ben. I'm going to stop you right there because you're making a statement that then you're basing an argument. You're creating a predicate that may not be true, that then you're basing your entire argument off of. And the predicate is that nothing's happening and that success isn't being achieved. And that's not true. Amazing amounts of things are happening. But we live in a vastly complex world, 7 elements of power: diplomacy, information, martial, military, economics, finance, intelligence, and legal, law enforcement. 7 complex domains that all independently are unreal complex at every scale. And as they, impact and influence one another, are vast orders and orders of magnitude more complex. So we need to be very careful thinking that things aren't happening. Astounding things are happening. They're happening all over the world, and they're happening at a rapid pace. If they're not going fast enough as we want them to, okay, got it. But, things are going at the pace they can go without this going to blood in the streets immediately. It might go there anyways, right? We might get forced to where we have to go there. But we don't want to do that. And those of us that have seen civil wars, have caused civil wars, been involved in civil wars, we do not want that here at home. Yeah, does that mean we don't do anything and we're not willing to go there? No. Right? But there's a whole lot of people out here talking about a whole lot of things, about things aren't moving, they're not doing this, or they jump on something that Pam Bondi didn't do, et cetera. And it's all they do is demonstrate how little they actually understand about how complex the problem is.
Well, I guess that's where I think a lot of people are single issue voters on a lot of different things. And
young men can't be single anything anymore, right? We're in a complex time and men need to be complex people again. Young men are smart. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, if there are certain things, like everyone has a list of priorities, right? And if there's like no progress on priorities that might be, for example, the top of my list, stuff like immigration, stuff like the way the economy is functioning, stuff like that, right? If there's not much progress on that front, and meanwhile we're talking about basically more foreign support for Israel or whatever the topic may be, right? That's, I think, where you get people that are frustrated with it, right? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I definitely understand that sentiment.
Well, I said this in a conversation with somebody the other day. The anger is real and it's justified. Absolutely. The impatience to hear complex arguments, to hear somebody say, well, this is the solution, but it's complex. It's got 15 moving pieces. And these are the 3 impacts on each of those 15 moving pieces. And here's the primary alternate contingency plan for how we're going to move forward. Most people don't have, in today's world, unfortunately, the only time young men pay attention to such things is when they're playing a fucking video game. Well, here's what they need to do. We have these skills to think in these unbelievably complex ways, these multidimensional ways in the game. Well, what we need to realize is the world we're living in is the most sophisticated game that's ever been created. And we need to bring that same level of complexity and depth and nuanced understanding out of the game and into the real world. We're already, men are already trained for it, over a couple generations. But now we need to put down the video game. We need to put down the phone, and we need to look at the real world around us and go, okay, well, we got to play this game. We got to play it right. We got to play it unbelievably sophisticated against other players who are unbelievably sophisticated. Because the enemy does think multidimensionally. Don't think about the street thugs and the idiots and this stupid lady got shot, et cetera. They're disposables. The people who did this to us and are still doing it to us are ludicrously intelligent. They have no other distractions. They are not single issue voters. Well, they have one single issue: overthrow the American people. Right? So they have one single issue. But because that's their primary single issue, then they're willing to do all these other issues. We, as on the American side, we have to have a single issue as well: save America. Okay, well, if our single issue, voting issue, is Save America, well, that's composed of all these other kinds of things that have to happen. And we can't do them all at once. And, oh, by the way, I hate to tell you this, as somebody's been in gunfights and been rocketed and mortared and all that and hunted people, etc. Guess what? The enemy has a say in how things go and the pace of things. Right?
Yeah. Action, reaction, all that.
Action, reaction. They're also sitting there doing pace planning and thinking out how we might react and might respond and what their alternate solution and contingency and emergency solutions are going to be. Right? We're at this place, guys. We're at war. We have to think and act as if we're at war, and it's way more dangerous than a gunfight. It's way more complicated than a gunfight. And again, though, I've watched guys, because I play video games sometimes, Destiny and others. I've been kind of bored by games here recently, but I played a bunch of video games. The first thing I did in computers in the 80s was write stupid little computer games, right? Ludicrously childish compared to today, right? So Sid Meier's, I'm a huge fan of Sid Meier's Civilization and, Mass Effect and these other games where you really got to think out what you're doing, and every movement and action you're making is having some very serious second and third order effect consequences in other areas that you don't even, aren't related to that directly. Well, young men have been doing this for 3 generations now. Men are trained to think in this way, but for some reason, they're not translating that, they're not taking all these skills they learned in gameplay outside of gameplay into the real world where it actually really matters. And, oh, by the way, where all that gameplay was patterned from. Right? We're not going to outbeat these people with thinking low dimensionality, binary shit. That's not how they think. That's not how they're fighting. We got to, we're also not going to defeat them by just taking them on a head-on fight. They're estrogens. They don't do head-on fights. They'll get somebody else to do that. And even then, they'll get somebody to fucking stab you in the dark or something, right? We're fighting women, man. We're fighting women and estrogenic men. We're not fighting testosterone. We got to get out of this concept that we're going to beat it with strength and vigor and rightness. We're fighting mean, nasty, estrogenic peoples. That's a different fight.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting is, like you said, it's very complex, and there's a lot of different nuances that come with where we are now. But I think the way to potentially tilt things, at least in our favor, people that want what's best for America, is to come up with some answers to get basically the young men, like heritage American men, on their side. And I think that's where you see people in the mainstream media talking about this issue, and they are basically allergic to real solutions as far as like what you can actually do to make all this work. But what are your kind of thoughts on the best way to set something up where young men have more of a stake in society moving forward, and they're not just going to say, all right, enough's enough. Like we just want to start over. Right.
Yeah. I've been writing on this and I've been speaking on it. We lose our young men. We lose everything, period. We lose our young, and the young men that we need, we can't give them handouts and all that, because that's not what they want. They want to be contributors. Well, okay. I wrote a book called The Modern Knight's Guidebook. I highly recommend to read that. I highly recommend the read of The Eternal War. So you understand how the enemy fights. That's The Eternal War. And then The Modern Knight's Guidebook is how how we have to prepare ourselves, and how do we have to be developed in order to fight. Excuse me, and conduct ourselves, etc. Young men need to, men, not just young men, it's men my age too, right? We need to stop trying to fight fights bigger than we are. We need to fight fights that are in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our towns, that we can fight, that are at the scale and the level that we can fight. Well, what does that first require? First requires you do what's called intelligence preparation of the battlefield. You get to understand your community. You put time and hours in every day to understanding who is who and who's what and who's doing what and who's connected to who in your community. Map that shit out. It's just, again, like these sophisticated video games, right? Like Sid Meier's and some of these others. Figure it out. Figure out who's got alliances. Figure out who's doing what. Who's connected to who. Who's somebody saying something. Is that really what they're doing? Find out who's the other good people in your community, other good guys in your community. Form alliances, form networks, partner with them, because no single man in any community, no matter how small, is going to be able to map this all out himself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then look for, do we expect that, somehow we're going to turn the federal government into this massive, capable behemoth that they're going to solve all of these complex problems at the state and city levels and the county level? No, we're going to have to do that shit ourselves. And do you think the state level and county and city level enemies aren't working against us all the time? They are. So, the first thing is only, first off, decide to take up the American fight to sustain America. That's the single issue. Everything else is a component piece of that. So be a single issue person, right? Okay. Then if you pick up and say, okay, I'm going to fight for America. Okay, well, what's the next step? Well, you need to take a step back and go, how the hell does America work? Right? How is the war being waged against me using the American system? Okay. And then you take from there and go, okay, well, how can I contribute to the counterfight? The problem that we have is that the enemy is teaching, estrogenics, women and children, how to fight us in college and grad school. I mean, they're actually quite literate, and they've been doing it for 40 years, 60 years. Right?
Yeah. I mean,
and somehow we're going to just,
1950s.
if we're righteously indignant enough, it's going to change it. No, we got to fight.
Yeah.
To fight, you need to know how to fight. The fight that, the kind of war that you're in. And then you have to prepare yourself for that. Then you have to take a step back. Okay, well, this is the way the fight is being fought. Here's who's fighting against me. Here's how I have to train and prepare and organize and relationship connect and resource connect myself so I can be in the fight. And it turns out if you do all of that, now you're of real value to some people with deep pockets. You're of real value to people who have access and relationships that could help you out in your life.
Yeah.
Now you're of value. Not just now, but through the rest of your life, because once you commit to this type of full spectrum development and, counter fight, once you make that decision, it never changes. That's who you are for the rest of your life. And you'll get improve in your capacities, in your resources, in your relationships for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I guess the follow-up question there is that I think the local focus is something that's important, because at the end of the day, like, at least I'm not going to have an impact on what happens at the federal level. Like, that's just not where I'm at.
Or you're not going to have an impact on Kootenai County. It's up north a couple hours, and right?
Yeah. But I guess the local impact side of things is pretty interesting as far as what could actually be done to improve the day-to-day, like, in your area, right? Instead of right, just whining about certain things that are happening at the federal level, or certain events and certain things where it's one of those things where you see people talking about what's going on in Venezuela, like them complaining will have an impact on it. And it's like
it has all to do with you.
I have an opinion on it, but I'm not what I think about is not going to change the outcome. Right. And I think that's where people get so caught up in, like, the social media news cycle, the day-to-day that's always chasing the shiny object, and it's pretty easy to get sucked into it. So I think that's something where they do it in purpose. They invest, terribly sorry, Ben, but they invest heavily in us putting all this stuff in front of us so that we're not paying attention to the local level. We're not developing ourselves such we can impact the local level. Because all power at the high, even at the national level, is an accumulation of local power.
right? It's an accumulation and a compounding of local and small power. So if they want to maintain themselves in control, what they have to do, they have to make sure that we're not looking locally. So they give us all the sensational stuff at the state or above levels, or the nation state, or even the international level, to keep us deflected away from what the hell's happening 3 blocks from me.
Yeah. Whether it's Maduro getting picked up, or the ICE confrontation in Minnesota, or whatever the latest event of the week is, right?
The latest dopamine dump.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely been an interesting conversation. I do want to ask your thoughts on, if you have any thoughts on what's going on with financial markets right now. It's been interesting start to the year. Right now, as I kind of look over my second screen, you've got all the precious metals continuing to run. You've got the S&P, all the random equities. I mean, I think they're about to take a dump, but they always seem to come back and do a save on that. But what's your kind of thoughts on broadly what we're going to see out of different financial markets and different asset classes over the next 12 months and the next 3 to 5 years?
I think, of course, we're going to see normal cyclical change into metals, continuing into metals, all various kinds of metals. I think we're going to start, excuse me, as we break London, the city of London's ability to price metals and all of the hidden ways in which the financial system prices metals through, direct corporate pricing and all of that. We're going to start seeing natural pricing for metals. And of course, they're going to go up substantively, right? Like we're seeing in silver. So there have been all kinds of manipulations and machinations going on to keep metals, suppressed price-wise. As we break all of those hidden market pricing, non-market-based pricing mechanisms and structures and organizations and institutions, we should see the metals continue to increase in price. And that doesn't matter whether manufacturing's booming or not, right? It's just a store of value, shall we say, right? Future value, future generational value. With respect to the equities markets, I believe they're going to try and hang on and allow them to continue to run as much as possible because it's propping up so many other things right now. But it's so for the next 12 months, I don't think they're going to want to mess with that at all. In fact, they're talking things, they want to pump more capital into it, et cetera, through various mechanisms. But at some point, they're going to have to put the brakes in the next 3 years minimum, at the latest. They're going to have to put the hard brakes on the markets, and they're going to have to force companies back to business fundamentals. And so PEs are going to have to come back to, regular, normal fundamentals. And that means we'll probably lose 40% of the companies, maybe more. Some people said 60% of the companies will get delisted because their financials are fraudulent, right? Their only value is their value in the stock market. Like Apple right now makes more money off of its investments than it does off of its products. And so it doesn't pay attention to products anymore. Couldn't care less. Right.
Yeah, haven't released an iPhone in 4 or 5 years has been anything significant.
They don't care. They basically got rid of their design team and their R&D teams, and they don't care. So metals, we're just going to see the continued rise there as organic market-based pricing is now increasingly applied. At some point, through that transition, we should start to see some capital leaving the equities markets and going into the the hard assets, the hard physical assets, but maybe not a lot because there's a lot of capital that's got to get soaked up. And then at at least the next 12, maybe next 24, 36 months, they're going to try and keep the equities markets running as they're, jiggering other things and breaking dependencies with other things, et cetera. They're really counting on this new, stablecoin Ponzi scheme to, really stabilize and take care of things. And I get why they're doing it. I get the logic, but it's a straight up Ponzi scheme, right?
Yeah.
You can issue debt, but that debt has to have a 1-for-1 U.S. Treasury debt. What does that mean? What it means is that the U.S. Treasury is now the actual economy. By definition, government spending will be the base of the economy.
Yeah. I think the point too that you make on equities is interesting because, right, if they want the number to go up, they can make the number go up. But if they do that and at the expense of creating like the ever widening wealth gap and I think it creates more of that divide. There's going to be a point where people just say, okay, this is all fake anyway. And like, what's the point of paying into the system or trying to support it if this is how our society is going to run and our taxes go to the Quality Leering Center in Minneapolis and on and on, right?
Yeah. So let's put it this way. Why would I want to struggle to survive, to recover and sustain my country if I'm doing it for people who were made billionaires because they brought a cryptocurrency token with money that was, qualitative easing or PPP money or, other money fakely pumped into the system. Now I am struggling and fighting. I'm taking a 50-year mortgage, which is indentured servitude, by the way. I'm taking a 50-year mortgage and I'm doing all of these things to sustain all of these artificial billionaires. Why am I doing this? Why are we working this hard? Why are we as a people sustaining these artificial trillions and trillions and trillions of wealth, none of which is real, and 99% of which was basically stolen? Why would we do that? Right? There's at some point, I suspect very much. I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know what's going to come about. But, I had this conversation earlier with Tommy Kerrigan and John Waters and Jim Kunstler. And at some point, I think it's coming rapidly, the Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen A are all just going to say, we don't believe in wealth anymore. We don't believe in the dollar. We don't believe in cryptocurrencies. We don't believe in any of this anymore. It's all fake and made up. And we're being asked to sustain, we're being asked through the sweat of our labor and impoverishment, et cetera, forget all your little games. I don't want your handouts. That's a slave. You're right.
Yeah. No one actually wants UBI.
Nobody.
They want a system that works, right? And no one wants to.
I want to understand my value in my community by my labor, by what I contribute to my community, not through these artificial things and not through a handout. Because if I have to take handouts, I have no value in my community. None of us do. I don't care how sophisticated and clever your handouts are, 50-year mortgages, et cetera, right? What is happening is that rather than fundamentally resetting and restructuring the system, you're just doing some magical words and magical digital contracts, and you want us to sustain all of this ludicrous wealth that has no basis in reality whatsoever. And what does that mean? You want us to sustain you in your unbelievably comfortable lifestyles by sustaining a lie of lies of lies. So at some point, I suspect men, and this is something I believe in very much, and we're going to restore our civilization as primary and just stop chasing wealth as the purpose of a life, and let the whole system collapse no matter what they do. So, there's some things I've been writing, and people should read the As Rome Burns series and the Financialist Kill Chain and This Our English Civilization and some other things other books I've written. I'm getting ready to release a thing. People can go chase it down and try and find it. But men need to reorient themselves around their communities and being men in their communities. And what does that mean? You know your community, you understand it, the good and the bad and the indifferent. And you're doing everything in your power, building relationships, alliances, knowledge, skills, experience, resources, etc., so that you can counter this insanity, this anti-American, anti-human insanity in your own community. Well, that will make you of great value to the world of men. Well, being of value in the world of men gives you access, placement, resources, and things you couldn't even imagine right now.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting thought to wrap up with. And I guess the one thing I'll add is when you start to look at some of these systems and institutions that have been built and are clearly in signs of, like, they have major signs of decay, whether it's the educational system, the medical system, health insurance, right? There are signs that I think some of these things are starting to collapse under their own weight already. Yeah. And when you look at healthcare costs and you look at, right, what has basically been done with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, some of these different programs, right, and how that has kind of developed, at some point people are just going to say, look, no, I'm not paying $500 a month for healthcare. Like, I'm just not. Right.
Well, people are starting to already check out. They're already checking out. Right. And it started with student loans. That was the first major, I'm just not going to pay it. Right. I can't survive. And, so that's the first major one. And now, there's tax revolts starting. Right. That's why they're trying to do away with tax, because they realize that's the big one that's coming, where people are just going to stop paying taxes. And if enough people just stop paying taxes without them saying, well, you don't have to pay tax first, well, what happens next? Then people go to other abusive, extractive systems and say, well, I'm not going to do that one either. And then their whole artificial wealth system collapses. That's why they're going so hard at trying to, tell us about what we're going to do away with tax, et cetera, is because they know that we're already tax revolting.
Well, they better be quick about the tax thing.
What's that?
They better be quick about the tax thing then.
That's exactly right, because it's already happening.
Especially with some of the recent events, and when you see the fraud and abuse and all this other stuff, it's like, okay, well, at the end of the day, if this is where our money's going, then
so this is what happens, right? This is what happens with the people, is when there is no more they can there's no more weight they can carry, right? Good old Cowboy Bebop, Spike Spiegel, right? You're going to carry that weight. When you can no longer carry any weight, you just start putting things down, and you don't feel bad about it. The problem is that once you realize that you don't need to carry that on your shoulders and you can put it down, you realize there's other things in your pack that you can take out and put on the ground and leave there and not worry about either. And very quickly, their whole artificial regime and system just disappears. This is Mimi. This is Mimi, by the way, everybody.
Yeah. For our audio listeners, the cat has made an appearance. Is that the shy one, or is the other one?
She's one of the shy ones. Yeah, she's the old lady. She came with us from Japan.
Nice. Well, I guess the follow-up question for that, and I'll try and make this quick because I think this is a perfect place to wrap up, is if you start to see people opting out of some of these different things and these old institutions and practices and regulations, laws, like the whole overarching,
the whole regime
system.
Just the whole regime.
Yeah. When you see like the cracks in the foundation there, like where does that lead for stuff like the US dollar? Where does that lead for the bond market? Like where's that lead for residential real estate?
Yeah, they're all artificial systems. They all just collapse. Right. So what we need to understand is that once we went off the gold standard and we went to fiat in 1971, and really this goes back to the 1930s because we manipulated gold then, right? They bought and then went from $27 to $33.
Yeah, it was 21 to
20,
35.
Something like that.
I mean, it's like close to a 50% devaluation.
Yeah. So we were already manipulating there, and then we've been manipulating, metals values for a century or more. But really where it took off, for all intents and purposes, all reality, since 1971, we've maybe had 4.5% total growth everything else is artificial. Everything else, maybe combined in that whole period, 4.5% real growth. That means that 80%, 90% of valuations need to just go away.
Yeah.
Now, here's the astounding thing. What that does is that brings prices and everything down again, and people can afford to live. Because the only reason we can't afford to live is because of all this artificial valuation of everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Where do you think that leads as far as like a metals backed currency? Do we have gold and silver becoming, hey, this is like what we're using, and there's going to be inflation at the rate of how much gold we dig out of the ground every year and how much silver we use, because silver would be more likely something to be used for day-to-day transactions. But do you think it's something where, like, there are technologies where we can basically say, hey, this is 1 for 1 with an ounce of gold, with an ounce of silver, and so you don't need to be like carrying around all this stuff in a back pocket? But do you think that's where the technology goes?
Yeah. Okay. So wonderful question, and a great place to finish here. And I'm probably gonna have to run. Terribly sorry, but
yeah.
The only way we get back to fundamentals is some form of real gold and silver that gets settled immediately, and that is some form of a tokenized metals. Right, gets cleared and settled immediately at frictionless and very low cost with virtually no intermediary. That's the how do you deal with the growth rate that you need to sustain things? You get rid of intermediary costs, because those produce the intermediary costs. For clearing, settle, for ledgering, clearing, settling, etc. Those produce nothing. They're liabilities.
Parasites.
They're parasites. But they were necessary at a time, right? Yeah. They were necessary at a time. So I don't want to.
Now they're just skimming off the top.
Now they're just taking, and there's so many involved that it's just, if I'm selling a product and I have 3% profit margin, but I'm having to pay Stripe 2.5%. What is my profit margin?
Yeah, exactly.
0.5. Right. So, okay. And that's just one Stripe transaction. I might have input costs, transactions out, et cetera. Okay. So give me a cost or give me a second. Some form of metals, hard metals ownership, not paper contracts, but some form, or hypothecated contracts or derivatives, but some form of hard metals clearing and settlement that's instantaneous and virtually zero intermediation. So, the end-to-end transaction total costs you 0.5% or something. Now, with metals alone, you can have a fairly healthy, robust, sustainable economy that grows at the 4.5% you need per year, based off of productivity and conversion and these types of things. To your point, we have the technologies now pretty much to do that, right? We're getting there. One of the things that could come out of stable coins, et cetera. Okay. But that's not where they're going. Where they're trying to go is they're trying to prop and sustain the whole system as it is by convincing us that the value of a unit of debt, right? Because they're still trying to do a debt-based system, right? Stable coin, for every dollar you lend, you have to buy a $1 of US debt. It's just transferring the debt ownership from banks to the government. Right? So it's still a debt-based system. That's what a fiat system is. It's not the currency, it's the debt. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to transition to that. And what they're trying to convince us is that the improvement in valuation is because the amount of electricity and the amount of complex computation we did added value. So for all intents and purposes, the value of the debt is based off of how complex and how much computations we do. It is the most ludicrous, and they're openly saying, Elon said it, much respect for Tom Luongo, but he's articulated it, right? That the value of our currency, the value of our economy is going to be based off of the amount of electricity we used and how complex we use that electricity in the transactions itself. Like, why does Bitcoin have any value whatsoever? Because you created a stupid software program that mines Bitcoin. How the hell does that create any real value whatsoever? It's the most ludicrous, made up magic bullshit. But it's sophisticated, right? So there's an old saying, right? What is magic? Everything of complexity sufficiently just beyond what we understand scientifically and technologically. Right? So those things I fear are going to have to fail, meaning people just stop buying into them other than the big rich people, but everybody else is like, no, we're not going to participate in this. Those things have to fail before we can get to the fundamental system, which is also somewhat being developed as well, right? Mm-hmm. Mostly through the BRICS, et cetera. But to get to the, what is the value of the currency, the American currency? One, I don't know. I think we do away with the currency, to be quite frank, because it itself is a parasitic thing. And what you do is you just have these smart ledgers, right? These intelligent, rapid, smart ledgers that clear and settle immediately.
Well, I think people would be shocked too if they were able to, right, basically have the transactions with gold or silver, right, for day-to-day uses, for
or tin or aluminum or copper or whatever. It could be doesn't need to necessarily be just gold and silver. But it has to be physical.
Looking at history, though, like those are going to be probably the two. And I know silver has some industrial uses. It's obviously been a big focus of everyone over the last couple months, and I've been pretty interested in it as well. But the way I kind of look at it is like, if you have a way to, right, pay for a service online instead of a credit card, you can basically say, hey, I'm going to effectively wire someone an ounce of silver or 2 ounces of silver, whatever the cost is, right? If there's a way to do that without like, oh, you just paid 5% in transaction fees.
Correct.
Right.
And then you got logistics and you've got, storage and you got all this other, right?
Yeah.
The thing I would say this, though, is we do also have to remember that in our currency, when we had hard currency, we still had coinage that was made out of other metals, and the metal itself had value. Mm-hmm. Right? Not just gold and silver. That was the higher level ones. But for transactions that, if gold and silver rise to where their real market price are, you're talking an infinitesimal fraction of an ounce of gold and an infinitesimal fraction of an ounce of silver for most things.
To your point, I think $100 worth of nickels right now has like a melt value of like $140.
Right?
Yeah.
So, it doesn't necessarily have to be just gold and silver. That's for the larger transactions, right? But it can be other metals. It easily clears and settles between, banks, institutions that keep the actual metals or keep the actual contract, So there is a way to do it. My fear, though, and my concern and my fear is that right now they're trying to prop up the whole system with Bitcoin and stable coins, et cetera, so that we don't go through this $80-90, 80-90% devaluation of everything valued in fiat currencies. Right? They want us to sustain their rich living by us believing that computers mining Bitcoin or stable coins that are actually just federal debt, meaning if we go to stable coins, what it means is that the U.S. government is the base of the economy by definition, because it's U.S. debt. For every dollar you're issued to go do something in the real market, you're buying $1 of U.S. debt. By default, that means the U.S. government debt is the economy.
Yeah.
Period.
That's not going to end well.
That's exactly what we have now. We're not actually even that far yet. We're only about 60% at this point. Then it'll be 100%.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're way down that pathway, and these big brain people, and you got all the folks that believe in crypto as if it's a religion, and Bitcoin is God, and Satoshi's God, and Bitcoin's the the Holy Spirit or whatever. And how are you going to, this is a new religion. I wrote a piece on this called computationalism. They're trying to give us this new religion that replaces the religion of financialism, which is computationalism, where we believe that computers are God, that AI is God, that quantum computing and AI is the supreme being. we need to not fall for it this time like we did 400 years ago when we fell for the whole, currency, financialist system as, the new religion, the new belief system where wealth became God.
Yeah. And you can borrow from the future and consume in the present.
God's grace, right? You can earn some of God's future grace today. What is that? That's debt.
Yeah. Well, definitely I think a good place to wrap up because it's a lot to think about as far as like some of the big picture changes I think are coming. And I do have to ask my traditional closing question.
Mhm.
And I've asked a couple times before, but what book should I add to my reading list? I'm sure you've got a couple, and I'll definitely throw some links into the ones that you've written. But what else is maybe top of mind for books you've been reading lately?
To be quite frank, for the last 4 years, I've been reading books. I've been writing them. What I would have people read is The Financialist Kill Chain to understand what's going on, where this comes from, how old it is, where they're trying to go. I'd read The Financialist Kill Chain.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to start. The health topic we're maybe hoping to get into, we'll have to wait for another time, but I'll definitely, I won't wait as long to have you back on the podcast again so we can maybe get into some of those topics. I think that's another area where you're seeing some of the old institutions and systems break down as far as the trust of the people and all that. So definitely too long of a topic to fire up here right at the end, but I really appreciate taking the time.
Yeah, man, it's always good to talk to you. And hopefully here not too long, we'll get to go up skiing. My daughter wants to head up to that place of yours, your favorite spot.
Yeah, I'll have to look. I'll be, I think, traveling out of town here in a couple of weeks, but maybe once I get back, we'll be able to find some time where it's not a weekend $150 day pass or something. So
yeah,
anyway,
awesome. All right, brother.
Yeah,
it's always good to see you.
Appreciate taking the time. I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.